Welcome to Local Everywhere. I'm Cynthia Pooler in outer space today. And my guest today is Brooke Goldstein. And Brooke is a textile artist, and she's going to talk about her craft. So, Brooke, how did you get started? What interests you with textile art?
So, I was really just drawn to it. I started hand sewing at 3 and started machine sewing at 6. So it was just something that, it was just my body wanted to do it, my mind wanted to do it. And then I was really fortunate that even though I went to a public school for high school for all my before college years. I went to public school, but it was a really well funded high school with a really good art program. And so I actually got to take some textile classes in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up wanting to go to art school and got into Rhode Island School of Design and thought I was going to maybe do something with like graphic design or industrial design. And then I realized, no, it's textiles. It's always been textiles. So it's sort of like the love you've always had, but somewhat overlooked and then chose.
Right. So, what were the first things that you created?
Like as it professionally or as a kid or
As a kid, and then we'll go into the professional stuff.
well, as a kid, I was very obsessed with like, which is appropriate now, I guess, Barbie. And I saw the interview you did with the local theater that's doing
Hmm.
Barbie play. But yeah, I was super obsessed with Barbie and like, like Shira and all that stuff. And so I would make like clothes and furniture for the Barbie dolls. And
Nice.
yeah, and I kind of like we had a finished basement. I kind of like took over the perimeter and just like made a Barbie village around the entire basement. So that's sort of like where I started. Yeah.
So, when you were young and you did all this stuff with Barbie, did you show it off to other people, or what did you do with it?
So no, it was mostly just for me. But my mom really liked to show her friends and stuff like that. But I would get a little annoyed. I'd be like, I'm working, like I'm working down here.
Mhm.
So so I didn't really like to show it off, but it was like my own little like escape, my own little world. So
So, did you take any, was there anything in high school that helped you along?
yeah, so I went to high school in New York State, and in New York State we have there's like the regular diploma that everyone gets when you graduate college in the country, but we also have a what's called a Regents diploma.
Yeah.
Um, for anybody who's listening who's not familiar with New York State, and a lot of that goes with like sequentials, right? Like you would take like this one, this two, and so in my art classes they actually created sequentials for textiles, so there was a textile 1 and textile 2. So we learned things like knitting, weaving, traditional beadwork, felt making, and so I ended up actually winning a national scholastic award for a felt piece that I had made, and I had like pretty much every teacher in that art department was extremely encouraging to me and the other students, and a lot of us actually went to art school so from that program.
So, what did you learn in art school? What was the curriculum like?
So in art school, so at RISD specifically, you start with the foundation years, which most art schools you start in what's called foundations. So you'll have typically like a drawing class, a 3D class, the drawing class typically you draw from life, from live nude models, and you'll also have art history, there's probably something else too, like foundations. Usually like a color theory class or something like that. And so that you'll spend your majority of your time doing that. Typically, the first 1 to 2 years of school. For RISD, it was 1 year. I'm over 20 years from graduated, so I don't know how they've changed it. But yeah, so at RISD, typically you would take 1 year of what's considered foundation studies, and then you would declare a major fairly early at RISD. You're almost, I think you might still be in first semester when you declare your major. I don't know if they still do it that way, but yeah, and then you go into your sort of specific classes. So textile starts off with you take a weaving class and a surface design class and a painting for textile students class.
Mhm.
And then you also have to take electives. So you do have like a science requirement, you do have an art history requirement,
Mhm.
so things like that. And then typically you would pick a path. In textiles, it's usually either surface design, weaving, or knitting. So I did go up the path with weaving, but I also did surface design. So some people have a bit of a crossover. But surface design was my main focus. So
So many people knit. That's classified as textiles.
yeah, all yarn crafts are actually textiles. Knit, crochet, macrame, that's all textiles or fibers. But yeah, yeah.
So when you go to an exhibit or something, do people have things that they've knitted that
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, like professionally, I pretty much only make fine art, so I don't do wearable or home goods or anything like that. So like
huh?
within textiles, I consider myself a textile artist. I specifically make, just art pieces, whereas other people might make wearables or home goods. Or some people do a little bit of both. Um, so typically when I show work, it's either just a solo show of my work, or in a show that's like fine art based.
So do you do farmers markets and stuff?
So no, so my work isn't really commercial. What I typically my primary practice is quilted room installations. So
Mhm.
I mostly show work in museums, art centers, and galleries. And typically that work is funded by the organization. So
So you have to go around to the different art galleries and say, this is what I've done. I'd like to be included. Is that how it works?
not really. Maybe when you're getting started, you might be doing that. You might be introducing yourself or sending letters of introduction. But typically, what'll happen is, or people will like apply to be in a group show. Like they'll see a group show that's on a theme or a certain subject matter that, they think their work would fit into. And there's usually parameters for that. And then you'll apply. And if you get in, you'll be in that show. For me, I started out well in Providence, Rhode Island, where I'm from. So Providence, we have an organization called AS220, which is an awesome organization, and it's really designed to like give artists of all sort of mediums and genres a starting off point.
Mhm.
So there, I was able to literally just sign up for my first professional show. There's different spaces there. And so I'd have to look at my resume for the year, but I had my first professional show at AS220. I mean, it has to be almost 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And so from there, I developed a relationship with some local galleries at the time, many of which have closed, mainly because what happens is the galleries typically move into affordable rent areas, and then gentrification happens, and then people buy the buildings and up the rent, and then the galleries are out. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it's tough. It's really tough for galleries, especially opening in, cities like Providence, where there's a ton of artists, and really great people making work, but there's not a ton of a market for selling work. At least in Providence, there's more of a sales market in sort of Newport, Jamestown, Rhode Island area, where it's like more touristy.
So, an artist in Providence, Rhode Island, how did they get noticed?
It's really hard, yeah. So, a lot of people will try to apply for funds, which also could potentially go with opportunities through the state, or the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts. There's also the Interlace Fund, which is part of the Dirt Palace / Wedding Cake House, which is another organization. It's like a feminist art space that also does some granting. There's potentially opportunities. There's some galleries in the libraries that you could potentially show at. There's the RISD Museum, but that's really for more established artists, or they do have some student galleries. There are some private galleries, but you would have to be invited, so yeah, so for most of the opportunities that I get are from invitations. So I'm mostly invited places.
So, if you're showing your work off in a library, you're not going to make much money that way, right?
No, and for me, my work isn't commercial anyway, so it's not typically going to private buyers. It's typically funded by grants or institutions. So there's people who make more commercial work, more work that goes directly to consumers. Pieces you might hang on your wall or have in your home. Whereas
Right.
most of what I do is like institution-based museums, things like that. So.
So, do you have anything on hand that you could show us?
Not really. So, yeah, I don't typically work in like pieces. Like it's an entire room. And anybody can go to my website. It's Brooke Erin, BROOKEERIN Goldstein, GOLDSTEIN.com. And I have a ton of work on there that you can see. Also, I can show you on my Instagram. I post a lot of the newest things, and I also teach. And so I post about my teaching. I specialize in all ages and family workshops, and I also teach anti-capitalist personal finance to artists. So yeah, and typically like pop-up workshops in different art centers and museums.
So, tell me a little bit about the teaching.
Sure. Yeah, I really like to teach when it comes to like actually art skills. I really like to teach the basics. I really love to see people be introduced to a new technique or a new medium, especially when you're working with all ages and families. It's really fun to like watch the kids learn like alongside like their parents or adults, and it's fun. Usually the kids are a little better than the parents, which I love. But
Mhm.
and it's like a cool family bonding experience. Like, oh, we just learned something new together, and now we can go home and continue this practice. So it's really one of my favorite things. I don't typically like to teach, only adults or advanced classes. I typically really just like beginner classes, and I like to introduce people into different art making, mostly textiles, drawing and painting is what I teach. But I don't know. I just think that art is for everyone. I think art is really healthy for us, even if you're not an artist, to have some sort of creative outlet, I think is really healthy. And that could be anything. That could be writing, that could be a visual arts practice, that could be cooking, like I just think as human beings, we should have creative ways to like process our thoughts, process our feelings, meditate. I think that's just really good for us. And so I like giving people opportunities to learn different things that might click with them and be something they want to continue.
So you know a lot of artists in your area,
Mhm.
and it's fun.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Rhode Island, it can be a difficult place to sell work or make a lot of money as an artist. But let's be real, most places are difficult to sell work and make a lot of money as an artist. But what's cool here is we are still like, everywhere in Rhode Island is like maybe 45 minutes to an hour away. It's a very small state. And I like to pop around, and I know artists that live all around the state and in New England, and we're really close to like arts and culture, but it's still fairly affordable to live here. Everything's gotten more expensive, but it's fairly affordable to live here and have space, like the space that you need, especially if you're a visual artist like myself who needs a lot of space to create because I'm doing like room size installations. So I really love it here. And there's just like a lot of artists to talk to and bounce ideas off of and, commiserate with because we do live difficult lives. We experience a lot of rejection. Many of us have to live on very tight budgets, or we have to work really long hours because if you're working part-time or full-time outside of your creative practice, then you also are most likely working full-time inside your creative practice. So it's essentially like having, 2 to 3 jobs.
So how do you figure what you want to do next? What inspires you? Do you see something? Do you hear something? What gives you the ideas to do what you do?
I get inspired a whole bunch of different ways. Like sometimes I'll be inspired by a conversation I had with somebody. Sometimes it's a feeling or an experience that I had. Sometimes I'll be asked to do something in a specific space and I'll walk into the space and I'll just see it and I'll know and the space will inform what I want to make. But I do have sort of just behind us in my studio, I have a ton of clipboards on the wall. I think it's 15 clipboards or something. Oh no, it's more than that. It's 18. So I have 18 clipboards on the wall. And so what I do is if I get an idea or there's a space I really want to work in, or maybe something that came up for another project but had to be cut because there wasn't enough time or room or something like that. So I'll just keep it on the wall, and then when I'm invited someplace or an opportunity arises to apply for a grant for that piece or something like that, I'll just take it off the wall and I'll work on it. So I typically have multiple ideas, sort of brewing at a time. And that includes I curate as well. So that includes my curatorial work. But I also plan out years in advance, which is unusual for a lot of artists. So basically, because I do large scale installations, mostly a short project for me would be like a year. So typically, I'm working on one piece for 1 to 3 years. Um, and so I'll have things planned out. So like right now, I have a piece that's up at the Jamestown Art Center in Rhode Island, in Jamestown, Rhode Island. That's part of a show called Pivot. That if anybody is listening and is either planning on going to Rhode Island this summer or in Rhode Island, check it out. It's a really great show. The Art Center actually invited a bunch of sort of well-known artists um, to um, to do something that's out of their normal practice. So I had this idea to do a stream of consciousness drawing. It's called Whatever Thoughts on Feelings, Feelings on Thoughts. Um, and so I sort of prepped for about 2 months and then was drawing for about 8 months. and then having a hanging mechanism. My partner, who's my life partner, but also acts as like my studio assistant. We act as each other's studio assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So he designs all my hanging mechanisms, and this is a 26-foot vertical drawing. So we hung it 15 feet up in the air, and then there's 11 feet that like sort of L's out across the wall, and that's very different than the quilted pieces that I've been doing lately. So, and typically my work is very planned out. This was more of like I draw a little bit, and whatever comes to me that day. So yeah.
Something like that. Is it for sale or no?
So that piece is for sale, but it most likely would end up in like a museum or a collection. So that is, we actually made it into a scroll. So it's considered an artist book. For any of your viewers who don't know what an artist book is, an artist book is typically either a singular book or a small edition of books that are all handmade by an artist. So it's not something you would be able to buy in a bookstore. It's something you would see in, a museum collection or in a library that has an artist book section to it. And so that piece would most likely be acquired by an artist book collection or an artist book library. So.
So it's not mass produced.
No, 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 no. So everything's done by hand, and there's just one of them. So
Okay.
yeah.
So how long would you say you've been interested in art?
I pretty much since I was born. I mean, I don't remember a time not being interested in art.
Huh?
My family, we really loved to go to museums. Art museums are my favorite, but I actually really like any museum. I really like museums. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so that context of people, making art or inventing or that kind of thing, and the display of information has always been really interesting to me, and so I don't really remember ever not wanting to be an artist.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if that answers the question.
So one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because artists have a different perspective than somebody who's not an artist.
Yeah.
What what's your perspective that differs from regular people?
Well, I mean, you know, I think there are like regular people that think like me, but it's like it's I don't know if it's the thinking or the perspective as much as the way we express ourselves,
Okay.
and communicate. So, for me, I'm very focused on the things we sort of overlook in life. Like we tend to ignore how we feel or justify it away. We tend to want to put everything in a very black and white context as far as this is right, this is wrong, this is love, this is hate, and so my work typically breaks down those barriers, where and it's really experience based. So what I want people to do is sort of get off their phones for a minute, get out of their head and into their heart, and see and have an emotional and intellectual experience. So that's what I work to create is sort of like what is good art, right? Like good art is a jolt that maybe makes you stop what you're doing and think about something either further or deeper or differently. So I can't say necessarily that I have a totally different perspective than other people, but I think I know that like part of my purpose is to give people opportunities to have emotional experiences. So that's what I try to do.
So has anybody ever come up to you when they look at your work and say, "Oh, that really changed my perspective"?
Yeah, yeah,
Did it
totally.
ever happen?
Yeah, that actually happens a lot. That happens a lot. Especially when you're working with large scale installation, because when you experience my work, you're small compared to my work. You know, you're in it. It envelops you. It swaddles you. You know. So so yeah, and not a lot of people, you know, are doing what I'm doing. So so yeah, so a lot of people, if you know, have come up to me and said, wow, like that really changed me, or that really made me feel seen, or you know, that really brought a lot of attention to an experience that I've had in the past. Kids really like my work. So kids will come up to me and be like, oh, like I want you to make it this way, or can you make one we can go inside this way, you know, or has hidden compartments, which I've done a little bit of. So
Mhm.
so so yeah, so you know, I've had a lot of people be affected by my work and tell me that, or be affected by my work and tell the institution, and they tell me. So it's been, that's the best part, you know.
So do you show your work primarily in Rhode Island or in other places too?
Yeah, no, I've shown my, you know, my last show was actually in St. Louis, Missouri, the show prior to this one. And that was a project we were working on. It was kind of, we were kind of talking about it for 3 years. And then it came to fruition, sort of in the last 2 years. You know, the pandemic happened. So, you know, things
Mhm,
messed up.
mhm.
But that piece was at the Stephen and Peter Sachs Museum, that is part of the Missouri Botanical Garden. And that show was called Botanical Resonance, Plants That Make Sounds. And they brought me in sort of as a non-sound based piece, visual, for people that might be hearing impaired, to sort of express visually a sound experience. So which was really cool, and it was actually the largest piece I've ever done. And so when you walk in the room, you saw sort of half the room was above ground, half the room was below ground, and this is all on my website. And then if you go to my Instagram, and click the link in my bio, there's a links with a virtual tour if anybody wants to go check it out. It's still up. The piece is not still up, but the virtual store is still on. Virtual tour is still online. But
So, so what is your, I'm sorry for cutting you off. What is your Instagram address?
oh, it's at Brooke, Brooke dot Erin dot Goldstein, Goldstein.
Okay.
That's my Instagram handle. But yeah, so and so half the room was, I had done some research about, um so when you cut grass, we get that smell, right? And so
Mhm.
that smell is actually an olfactory experience of a sound. They're screaming. So grasses are actually screaming to notify other grasses that there's a threat coming. So when you cut your grass and you smell that smell, it's actually their screams. Yeah, yeah. I know. It's again, my work is really about empathy. So so I had so half the room was like an abstract depiction of grass being cut with these like ghostly screams coming out of it, and then the other half of the room was, I had researched about how trees talk to each other through their roots and through the oh, they call it the wood wide web. There's like a fungal system. So they
Mhm.
actually send sound waves, like talk to each other, but they also can send resources. They also can fight and actually withhold resources from each other. It's very, very interesting. So so it was really great. And that's, and the Missouri Botanical Garden is not only one of the, I think it might be the top botanical garden in the world, but it also is an amazing research institution. So so it was fun to do a more research based project for them. So yeah, so you walk in the room, so half the room is above ground screaming grasses, and the other half the room is talking tree roots. And that was all quilted and sort of like given a visual to those sound experiences, but also what that means for these, like the, arguably for most people, the two plants that are most common in our lives, but they have like really rich community and really rich emotional lives and use sound to communicate. So it was very interesting. Yeah.
So I have some trees when I
Hmm.
look out my window,
Hmm.
and this winter I had a burst appendix. So I would spend my days just in pain, just looking out the window at the trees. Okay, when when you're interacting with the tree, and if you talk to a tree, do they respond?
I don't know. I don't know if they're responding, but I do know that there's been all these studies about talking to like your houseplants and stuff, and how typically though if you talk or sing to your houseplants, they will actually be healthier and happier. So
Uh-huh.
so yeah, so I'm not sure if they're talking back. And their language, the sound is more of like a vibrational system. Um,
Mhm.
but they're definitely talking to each other, so
That's amazing.
yeah.
Because people when they think of art, they think of singing or music or dancing. But what you're saying is like, I don't think a lot of people know about the stuff that you're trying to teach.
Well, yeah, and again, it's like everything I do comes from sort of like an emotional lens where it's like not necessarily the why, but the like how do we feel about this? Like so it's interesting because I think again, so often we're either told not to feel or we're told how we're supposed to feel, you know?
Huh?
And that really should be something we are all free to do and figure out on our own. And that should be something that we have a direct connection with to ourselves and how we feel. And so if I can give people an opportunity to invite their feelings to the surface and sort of dialogue with that a little bit more in their life, that's a win for me.
So the next time I see somebody cutting their lawn, I'll say, you know, these leaves of these blades of grass are screaming for you.
Mhm.
Are they screaming for you to stop, or what do you think?
Well, they're warning their friends. Yeah, they're warning their friends that it's coming. Yeah, that the threat is coming. So it's interesting.
Now, how did you learn that? That is really interesting.
So, I have a lot of friends that are very, very smart in different fields. And so we like to, just have conversations. So I'm pretty sure that was like a fact I had learned maybe like 10 or so years before I even did this piece. I don't know, I could have been listening to like NPR or something, Radio Lab or something like that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so and then when the opportunity to do a piece for this show came, I was like, oh, I had remembered about that. And I was like, this could be a really interesting thing to explore. And then I had also uh listened to that book. I think it's called like The Secret Life of Plants or The Private Life of Trees or something like that,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
which is an excellent book. Very it's like, almost like a scientific soap opera about plants, and
Uh-huh.
and how they interact. I think it's just about trees, but I can't remember. But I had listened to that book, and so then I was like, oh, this is the perfect thing. Take people above and below ground, these two most common plants in our lives, create a visual for this auditory experience that we can't hear anyway,
Right.
so
But we smell it.
we smell it, which is kind of like a synesthesic experience, I don't know for anybody watching who's not familiar with synesthesia. So synesthesia is it's I don't think it's considered a disorder necessarily, but it's a phenomenon that certain people it's I think it's like your wires get crossed. So you might be able to smell a color or like see a sound. So yeah, synesthesia, look it up. It's very, very interesting. But it's also typically highly emotional in people. So if you can smell colors and you're in a bad mood, you might smell garbage when you see a certain color or this, that, and the other thing. It could be, it's a very emotional experience usually.
Mhm. Wow.
So yeah, and there's a bunch of famous artists, from art history that we either know had synesthesia or think had synesthesia. I can't. I'm so bad with bringing up names off the top of my head, but definitely something for your viewers to research if you're interested. Yeah.
So tell us how people can contact you, your website again,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what what
Yeah.
you do at different exhibits.
Yeah, so my website, so typically on my website is a great way for, like you to contact me, people who want to interview me or people who want to set up, hire me to do a workshop or are interested in my work, to show my work like galleries and institutions. Contact me through my website. Again, it's Brooke with an E, BROOKEERIN Goldstein, GOLDSTEIN .com. And then for everybody looking to take a workshop, like students or to see where my work is currently, that's usually on my Instagram. So again, that's at the at symbol Brooke, BROOKE dot or period, ERIN period Goldstein, GOLDSTEIN. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Brooke. This is enlightening. I never knew that trees did that. I mean, not trees, but grass. That's amazing.
Amazing, and it reminds us to like take a minute and like think about the world around us, like
Right,
there's so much going on in the world, a lot of bad, some really good that we can be really overwhelmed at, but it's also really important to like take note of your surroundings, both like people, nature,
right.
maybe things around you. It's important. So
People lead such fast-paced lives that what you're saying, like the grass, nobody really knows something like that, but that's absolutely amazing.
yeah. Well, and even I read an article, oh, God, this was maybe a couple years ago, where they said therapists were actually prescribing to people with anxiety and depression to go to art museums
Uh,
and see art. Like, I think just slowing down, like you said, taking a minute, thinking, feeling, giving yourself that it is self-care, and
right,
self-care is healthcare.
right. I think art is an underappreciated thing that people should know more about.
Absolutely. And also, you already know about art. Like by you, I mean everybody who's listening. I don't care if think you know nothing about art. As human beings, we have these receptors. All opinions are valid when it comes to looking at art and experiencing art. You don't need to know any history or any specific culture to appreciate art. Just go let yourself see art and don't feel like you don't know anything about art or you can't make art or you can't see art. That's not a thing.
Well, Brooke, this has been really exciting. Um, I look forward to talking with you in the future. I look
Yeah.
I look forward to people listening to what you say because it's important. So, give your information one more time.
Yeah, so it's brookeeringoldstein.com or at brooke.erin.goldstein on Instagram.
Thank you, Brooke. Have
Thank
a
you so much.
wonderful Fourth of July,
Yes,
and
you too.
thank you everybody for listening. Have a wonderful day.